To our first Fireside Chat. I'd like to introduce to you Sundeep Jain. Sundeep Jain, the CPO of Uber, is responsible for the company's global mobility and delivery products, including engineering and product management. Before joining Uber, Sundeep was vice president of product management at Google with the Search Ads Group, where he worked on connecting users' commercial intent with advertisers, including quality pricing and user experience. Sundeep also worked on search. Earlier in his career, Sundeep was vice president at Zynga, a founder of a tech startup that would be acquired by FIS, a public company with 100 billion enterprise value. We will be accompanied by Mary Jo Potter, a partner at Pegasus Tech Ventures. She's mainly focused on investments in the healthcare sector, with 23 years of investment experience and 8 years as a general partner of a VC firm. So without further ado, please help me welcome Sundeep Jain and Mary Jo Potter to the stage.
Well, we've already had a few minutes together, so we'll just dive right in. Sundeep, I think one of the enjoyable parts for our participants is hearing personal stories. Who you are, how you got here, kind of what's the journey been like?
Most people's journeys, including mine, are unpredictable, they're unplanned, they kind of unfold in ways that you didn't quite imagine. I might break my career into two chapters or two periods, and I'll talk about how I got to those two periods. The first period was where I was a founder and entrepreneur, and one of those 24/7 trying to build products, finding product market fit, and we can talk about that. And then the second period is where I worked at very, very large companies like Google and Uber that have extraordinary product market fit, and we wanted to scale to billions and billions of users. The way I landed at my journey is when I was younger, my dad was an entrepreneur, and he was an entrepreneur in the electronics industry a long, long time ago. And I just remember, I would be out and about, either playing basketball or reading a book or something or another, and he would constantly be working. It was this kind of grueling thing. And often I'd ask him about why he works the way he does. And he was just deeply passionate about the solutions he was building and making them as perfect as possible for users. And so that kind of inspired in me this desire to build products that can scale to a large number of users, and kind of just the intrinsic motivation he had around that. And then throughout that whole process, he would share lots of stories that would accompany him to various different things. And so I always had a desire to be an entrepreneur. I actually think it's one of the greatest things you can do in your life, is to build something out of nothing. It's perhaps the hardest thing, but it's also one of the greatest things. So I always wanted to be an entrepreneur. So after school, I started that journey. And by the way, my journey was a little bit easier because I started the company in the 1999-2000 timeframe, where it was a lot easier to start companies because the internet was just booming. And I spent 10 years doing that. And then in between my two periods, I took 3 years off, and I was a stay-at-home dad, and that was kind of the connective tissue between my two different chapters.
So how many people in the audience are entrepreneurs? Raise your hand. Hi. Okay. And how many are in the corporate world? Well, fairly well balanced. Can you talk about what you see as the difference? You've been in both worlds. Some people gravitate to one or the other, have an experience, and so on. What would you say to each of these audiences about the differences?
Yeah, that's a great question. For the entrepreneurs, my personal experience is that it is incredibly difficult to find good product market fit. And even when you think you found it, some exogenous event, some customer event, some flaw in your own product can make that product market fit evaporate very quickly. It takes a long time to have product market fit that you can kind of repeatably rely on. And so it is a period that's very hard and grueling, where you're constantly pivoting and reorienting. And what worked well for us was something that I learned from my father, which is if you get the right user experience and you keep obsessing about it, that inspires your users or your customers to repeat their engagement with you and retain with you for a long time, then you're on a trajectory where you can sustain product market fit. And so in general, my 10 years as an entrepreneur, I would describe as constantly in search for product market fit and refining that and tuning that and perfecting that. And throughout that whole time, you're always in a state of existential crisis. And even a large company like Uber was in a state of existential crisis for years and years. But as a small company, you're always in a state of existential crisis. You're in a crisis from a large company entering your space, some partner going in a different direction, users changing their behavior on the consumer side, or enterprises building either in-house solutions or gravitating towards something else. So in general, I found that period to be super fulfilling and rewarding, but also one that's grueling and difficult. And the satisfaction that you have for building products that solve some unused customer, enterprise customer, consumer need is quite great. So if you can pull that off, I hats off to you. So I would really encourage you to think big, build solutions, be user obsessed, and keep at it. And don't get confident in product market fit because it can change very rapidly. And then after I took some time off with the family, I decided to go back into large-scale companies because I wanted to operate at a very, very different scale. At both Google and Uber, we build products for billions of users globally and operate at very, very high scale. We have unquestionable product market fit, but the diversity of our users, the diversity of both enterprise and consumers, because we serve both, is quite high. So building products at that scale poses its own set of challenges. And so on the corporate side, I think it can be very fulfilling if you're operating at high scale, but some of the principles around being focused on those user experiences are equally important because it's difficult to sustain that at high scale. And so they're both great, terrific opportunities. I've had the luxury of being able to do both. Most people end up in one or the other because their DNA just kind of suits that, and that's what they like to do. And I think they're both excellent choices.
And before we leave the personal side, one of the questions people have, many in the audience are facing this, taking time off. Everybody's fear is if I do that, I'm out of the mainstream. How do you get back in? Can you just give them a little insight on your experience and any thought on that? How long ago was that? That was in the
15 years ago,
15 years. So any changes or different insights you might have?
Yeah, I think, and there might be one of these differences. If you're in one of these corporate positions, you're always climbing some ladder. So actually there's no clear inflection point to take time off. But if you're an entrepreneur, there come many opportunities that are inflection points. One of them is a sale of a company, which is what happened with me, but there are others as well. And I think there's always this tendency to jump back in and start the next thing because there's stuff happening around you. There's new hot technologies constantly being developed. And if you are out of the mix of information and the mix of building products, you feel FOMO, fear of missing out. And so I think you have to have mental fortitude where you want to take time off with your family. I had 3 young kids at that point in time. They're all teenagers now. And it was one of those unique experiences you can't replicate that I could only do because I happened to have sold a company. But it forms kind of this lifelong relationship with your kids on which you can build healthy, ongoing relationships. I was very grateful that I did it. My golf game didn't improve as much as I would have liked, but I did develop good relationships with my kids.
The grand myth.
Myth.
You probably were driving all day long. So let's talk a bit about the business side now. As an executive at Uber, and you're really driving all the changes. Talk a bit about what you're trying to optimize now at this juncture.
Okay.
Yeah, Uber
I'll say
in aggregate, this is a sum total of what riders and eaters pay Uber is plus or minus order of magnitude $150 billion a year. And so when you have
after he wraps up, thank you. So do you want me to
that much
on and basically say
kind of top line throughput in your system, it's very, very difficult to continue to grow at a very high rate. We aspire to grow at 20+% per year, even at those rates. And so we have billions of users across our platform globally, across different user bases. We have riders, we have eaters, we have drivers, we have restaurant merchants, we have grocery merchants, we have enterprises, that will distribute vouchers to their employees. It's a very diverse set of end user base. And so what we have to do when we're building for such a diverse user base at such high scale is continue to improve that same user experience. I know I'm repeating myself, but it continues to be the most important thing. And so if you are a user of Uber rides, you've likely seen some dramatic changes in the user interface over the last 2 years. And there's a lot of algorithms that power that behind that, where we've evolved from a single product company, which was just predominantly UberX, to a multi-product company. Now there's a whole range of products where, there was a time where UberX was 90% of our total trips, and now it's only 65% of our total trips as we've expanded the set of products that our users can use. So walking through that journey while continuing to ensure that the user experience is good is an important thing. And on the Uber Eats side, which is effectively an e-commerce app, but it's an e-commerce app that's quite rich with a lot of different vectors of influencing users. And so we've done a lot of work to expand and modify that app, mostly to improve user experience. And then people often forget that our most important constituent isn't quite the consumers, it's the earners. And the earners are in our app for 5-6 hours a day. So optimizing that workflow and experience that makes their lives easier is super important. So we build at scale for billions of dollars of throughput, but we still maintain the core tenet of continue to optimize the user experience, which leads to higher engagement, which leads to higher retention, which leads to kind of company level growth. And so we do that at scale across all of different user groups. And that's kind of the core tenet of how we operate the product and engineering teams.
Well, you've also made quite a commitment around zero emissions. Can you talk about where that is, where it's going, why you did it?
Yeah, one of the things that I'm super excited about at Uber is we have the opportunity to play a major role in the world's transformation to clean energy. For some of you may not know, but Uber's made a commitment that by 2030 we'll be zero emissions, both in the United States on both the rides as well as the Eats side. And some of this is already starting to come true. We have progress. So Uber drivers are 7 times faster going to electric. We have, in places like California where the policy environment is more friendly, 1 out of 10 miles driven on Uber is on electric. And so we are making a lot of progress towards the clean energy transformation. And we do a lot of things to help drivers, right? So we have built features that enable them to understand where they can charge their cars and how they should plan for charging their cars. We've filtered trips based on the battery life that we can read from the car. We have information for them on how they can save money on savings. We have kind of various dashboards to help them navigate and even purchase electric vehicles. So we're actually doing quite a bit to move the world towards clean energy. I mean, sometimes I think that what Uber's trying to do is build the next generation of cities that are greener, more livable, more environmentally friendly, and Uber can play a pretty large role in that. And so we're very, very excited about our contributions to society on that dimension.
Okay, cool. Awesome.
Well, you're probably closer than many of us to thinking 10 years out and what is human mobility going to look like?
So these are Sammy,
yeah, human mobility, we often think that 10 years out, we envision the future to be autonomous, we envision the future to be shared, and we envision the future to be electric. And so across autonomous, shared, and electric, 3 big themes. We're making progress towards all of those. We have autonomous vehicles on the Uber platform now. So if you're in Phoenix, you could actually book through Uber and take a Waymo ride, and you'll see more and more of that expansion. I just talked a little bit about going electric, and then we're continuing to launch new products and enable multiple passengers to be in the same car. So I think expanding shared rides is a core tenet of ours. So I do think in the future, the way you think about cities today will be very, very different. And cities will be, at least the transportation and movement components of cities will be autonomous, electric, and shared. And we hope to play a big part in that. I mean, sometimes people forget that Uber's, we're already 13 years old. And, across these 13 years, we've gone from a tiny little company to something that's now become a household name. For most people, I suspect, even in this audience, Uber is such an important part of your daily lives for movement, perhaps on food delivery as well. And over the next 10 years, it's hard to imagine now, but I really do believe that autonomous, electric, and shared will be just as much a daily part of our lives as Uber is today after the last 10 years.
Well, for our audience, especially we've got 10 finalists out there wondering how their day is going to go. Talk a bit about advice you would give now, whether it be in your industry or not, to entrepreneurs trying to, again, build things for the future, but obviously very planted in the present.
Yeah, I had an opportunity to spend a little bit of time earlier this morning just getting a little bit of high-level overview of some of the participants, including a subset of the top 10 qualifiers. And I really was very impressed by the caliber and quality of concepts. And what was even more impressive was that instead of just entrepreneurs operating at the very, very highest layers of software, there was a lot of physics and material science and certainly artificial intelligence and all of the various concepts. And that's super exciting. I think in general, entrepreneurs should tackle really, really large problems. If you remember, the product market fit is hard. Things change. The smaller the problem you tackle, the easier it is to get displaced. So think about a very, very big problem that almost seems unsolvable, and then pick a certain component of it and try to solve that, knowing that you can expand in lots of different ways. And so the concepts I saw all had those elements, which was very impressive. In general, the advice that I would give is don't give up, right? Entrepreneurism is hard. There's lots of twists and turns. Think of a big problem. The satisfaction of solving big problems at scale is unparalleled. So you just have to stick with it. You have to be nimble. You have to be willing to change your guideposts. And always remember, if you focus on making sure you're solving some unmet need for the user, and you're obsessed about solving that experience, you're obsessed about being in the shoes of the end user, you use a product like you use and like you were the end user, you will improve and optimize that experience. And it's the very, very best companies that were built, of which Uber is an example, came with a lot of hardship, an extraordinary amount of persistence, sometimes certainly not a straight line, but lots of twists and turns. But the end result can be very favorable. It can also, it can also be unfavorable, but you won't know that unless you just stick with it for long periods of time. So I really do encourage entrepreneurs, pick large problems and stick with it.
And finally, there's a fair number of investors in our audience. We were talking that you don't have a corporate venture per se, but you're very interested. You have a development group constantly looking in the market. What kinds of things do you look for, and how does your process work?
Yeah, so at Uber, we're not direct investors in young companies. However, we are very early adopters of young technologies. And so we have a large number of young companies that come to Uber and share what they're building. Now, some of it, if it's very material science heavy in the healthcare space, isn't going to be relevant, but things that are relevant that tend to be more on the infrastructure side or the measurement and optimization side. But we tend to be an early adopter, so we will invest by procuring technologies. by paying for technologies and utilizing and trying them. There's actually a high benefit to companies as well, because anything that can work in an Uber environment is likely to be portable across many, many companies. And so that's how we stay on top of technologies that are being developed that might be able to enhance Uber's missions and Uber's products. In general, I think finding, in the enterprise world, finding good pilot customers, and likely customers that are a little bit tough, that help products get better, is a good thing. I don't have specific advice for the investors out there, but I would suggest that investors that have interesting companies, we're open to becoming a customer to the extent it's relevant for us.
And again, a last few words of encouragement, advice, and so on for our many entrepreneurs, some of whom came here. We had 42 come. Obviously, there's 10 finalists, but we had phenomenal group of folks that may not get the $1 million today, but they persevered, they won in their regions. They should feel very good about getting here. What last few words do you have for the folks that have been on this journey for the year?
Well, first, my warmest congratulations to the 42 companies. I mean, to be even selected in the 42 is, in my opinion, an extraordinary achievement. And companies have come from all over the world: Eastern Europe, Southeast Asia, Latin America, and some in the US. So I actually think being one of the 42 companies is an extraordinary achievement. Now, capital is always interesting, but just the exposure that you've all obtained through this wonderful conference, the exposure you've had to other entrepreneurs, potential mentors, potential investors, I really do think it's an extraordinary opportunity. So congratulations on being one of those members. Often, you know, without taking anything away from the 10 companies out of the finalists, I would tell the other 32 companies that investors and competitions are often wrong. Many, many companies that have become great companies today were rejected by investors, rejected by various competitions and evaluators, because it's very difficult to predict the future. Companies go through lots and twists and turns, and they emerge very, very strong. And so stay at it, keep at it. You know, just being at this conference is a huge accomplishment. And then to the top 10 companies, I wish you all the best in your endeavors today. And you know, regardless of who wins or doesn't win, you, at least based on the concepts that I saw this morning, you have very, very high potential. So I wish you all the best of luck. And I'm really looking forward to using some of the products either in healthcare as a potential patient or in the world of software as a potential customer.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. Very much.
Thank you for your time. Thank you so much.
You did a good job.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much, you guys. We have some gifts that we would like to give to show our appreciation. Go ahead.
Thank you so much.
So thank you again, Sundeep, for sharing your insights